What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On Badgers. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings. We're going to talk about some of the risk with this move. Everybody's over the moon with it. I get it. Let's talk a little potential downside. We're going to do that on today's Locked On Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On Badgers. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings, your team every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, right? Like today, if we're able to just put out a little more content because there's something on our mind. I do want to say thank you to everyone who listens on the podcast. If you're just getting it on the way to work, that's awesome. If you're watching on YouTube, that's awesome. If you're in the Discord, that's awesome. So really do appreciate that. Listen, I wanted to talk about something that has I feel like has maybe gotten lost in the shuffle a little bit in all of this, because this move is so almost universally accepted as a home run hire, right? From the national perspective, you listen to guys on podcasts, Andy Staples, Jim Rome, McAfee, Barry Alvarez giving it the thumbs up. Badger fans, I would not universally, but pretty happy overall. Basically outside the locker room and some former alumni, this has gone over, it's gone over like a grand slam in the bottom of the ninth inning. But anytime you say yes to something, you say no to something else, right? Excuse me. And that's something my wife tells me a lot. When you say yes to that big platter of wings, you're saying no to broccoli, for example. And that's a trade-off I make often. So we said no to Jim Leonhard, essentially, not in terms of not forever necessarily, and not even that he can't be on the staff this year. That is still TBD, even though I think it's pretty unlikely. Glad to be wrong on that, by the way, but I don't think that's happening. But so we've said yes to Fickell, no to Jim Leonhard. And what's the real downside here? Like what the downside is and the potential risk and where this can blow up is Jim Leonhard could be potentially like Amazon stock before Amazon blew up, right? And we had the inside track. We had insider trading here to get Jim Leonhard early before anyone else could get on him and have him for 30 years, right? That's the downside. Because no matter what happens with Luke Fickell, he's not going to be here as long as Jim Leonhard would have been, right? So if Jim Leonhard ends up being a great coach, long-term, you've probably hurt yourself here. Just to be completely honest. Now, this can go in all sorts of butterfly effect ways. There's all sorts of ways this can play out now. Potentially Luke Fickell's here for a while. He does great. The program's elevated, and then you can bring someone else really marquee in. But there's also scenarios where Fickell leaves in a couple of years. I don't think that's insane. I don't think it's likely, right? Especially the more we hear him talk, the more I think he meshes with Wisconsin's culture. I don't think that's likely, but it would have been a zero chance with Jim Leonhard, right? So that's the risk. That's what you've given up. You've given up the potential ability to land a young stud coach for 30 years, 20 years, 25 years, whatever it is, like a long-term dude. And again, I'll repeat it. No matter what happens, Luke Fickell's not going to be here as long as Jim Leonhard was. Luke Fickell's older. He doesn't have the connection to the program. Now, he could still be a pretty long-term coach. It's not like he is 65 or 60 years old or 55 even. Like, he's going to coach for a while if he wants to. But he's still not going to coach as long as Jim Leonhard. And he doesn't have that connection to the university. So, I'm just saying, like, that's the downside. That's the risk. And that's why this move from Chris McIntosh is such an interesting power play, because he is giving up on something. It's not an all or nothing. Like, you are giving something up to bring Luke Fickell in. And there's this other scenario that people talked about. Well, you'll get Fickell and we'll get Jim Leonhard back at some point. Maybe, or maybe not, right? Like, you don't know that. I think there's coaches that they go somewhere, they establish themselves, and you don't get them back. So again, there's all sorts of scenarios here. But it is interesting to me that, Jim Leonhard, if he's the right guy, if Jim Leonhard ends up being a great coach long term, I think you've probably hurt yourself with this move. Now, we don't know if that's the case, right? We don't know if he will be. And I think short term, Fickell's the guy, right? I don't even think that's arguable. In the next couple of years, Fickell is going to be the better coach than Jim Leonhard just because he's done it. He's proven it. He's built a program. He's hired staffs. He's led the program. He's been the captain of the ship. Okay, he's more ready for this role right now. But long term is where you start to get into, if Jim Leonhard grows for a couple of years, like that's where you really start to get into, I don't know. It's interesting. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about this a little bit. The other thing I wanted to bring up here is, and we're going to get into the next segment. This is going to be a long show. I just had some thoughts I wanted to get out, but we're going to get into the next segment too. Jim Leonhard's quote about, tradition doesn't die when you adapt. I want to get into that in the next segment because I think that's interesting on a couple levels. But first, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and information. It remains the place that we go on the Locked On Network to get really all of our lines, futures betting, live in-game betting. They cover you on all sports, from football, basketball, baseball, golf, soccer. It's all there. I have an overlay that's supposed to show up here so you can see a really cool BetOnline graphic, but it's not coming up. But either way, BetOnline is awesome. And it's a place I use. I've talked about my futures bettings before. Listen, Scott's going to laugh at me again, but I got money on the Suns winning the title. I'm actually wearing my Suns sweater right now. And you can do that. Have fun. Pick out who you think is going to win the title. Put $5 on it, and you spend the season rooting along. It makes it more enjoyable. Grab your mobile device. Head to the website today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right. Again, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. This isn't going to be a long show, but I really wanted to talk about the potential downside here because this really could go in a couple different directions. And let's say the part I wanted to get to next is, let's say Fickell doesn't work out, right? I'm just saying, like, first, you guys know I love this move. I really like the hire, but there are two sides to everything, right? There's no guarantees in life. Let's say Fickell doesn't work out and he's gone in a couple of years, and now you've also blown your chance with Jim Leonhard, right? That's the nightmare scenario. And I don't think it's super likely. Just to be incredibly clear, I don't think it's likely. But there's a chance of it, right? And then I want to get into Jim Leonhard's comments about, tradition doesn't die when you adapt. And Leonhard would have come in, I'm very confident of this. He would have came in and he would have adapted the culture. Like, he would have changed things. He spoke openly about it. He talked about it. He was very clear about it. I thought he was very forthcoming, quite frankly. Like, after having taken over a head coach that I'm sure he still has a personal relationship with, to say, yeah, we've slipped here. We need to get better here. This isn't as good as it used to be. I'm going to change this. Like, I thought he was very forthcoming in the fact that things had to change and we're going to change. I have a vision. So he would have come in and he would have adapted the culture, but the culture still would have remained Wisconsin culture. And this is something Rajiv has talked a lot about. There's a chance that the culture changes quite a bit under Luke Fickell, and that's not always for the better. Like, that could be for the better or the worse. Even though Wisconsin has to adapt, I think the culture of Wisconsin is important to maintain. I think that matters to this program, the type of program it is, the type of people it attracts, right? Who it wants to be. That culture is a Wisconsin thing. And again, I don't think Fickell's going to come in and blast that away. He certainly said he wasn't. He certainly said the words like enhance. I'm going to come and build upon what's here. This does not need to be completely revamped, retooled. He said all the right things, but we don't fully know. With Leonhard coming in, we would have known. Like, we would have known that he's going to change some things. He's going to adapt some things, just like he said. But the culture and the core of what has made this program so good would stay. And I think that would have resulted in a winning program. Again, I like Jim Leonhard a lot. I don't think he's a guy that, if you had brought in here, would have failed. And the downside of bringing Luke Fickell in is we don't know for sure, right? We don't know for sure how it's going to work out. If you remember Gary Anderson coming in, and now really quick disclaimer, I am not comparing Gary Anderson to Luke Fickell, the head coach. Luke Fickell is way more accomplished. Okay, so just be super clear on this, but I want to go back to a certain aspect of the Gary Anderson hire. Barry Alvarez was talking when he interviewed Gary Anderson. He asked him specifically about Wisconsin culture. What do you believe in? And Gary Anderson parroted, I believe in it all. I'm raising my hand. Yes, I want to be here. I understand it. I'm all about everything that Wisconsin's about. And then you saw Gary Anderson get in the door, and it was pretty clear he wasn't, right? It was pretty clear that there was cultural things that he was trying to change and be different. And my point in this is, in the interview process, in the press conferences at the beginning, everybody says the right things, but we just don't fully know where Luke Fickell may take Wisconsin's culture. And again, I think it's going to go in good places. I want to be super clear on this. I think it's a home run hire, but there's risk here. And people are really getting over the moon with it. I just want to say, like, listen, it's a risk. This is a risk. Jim Leonhard, especially in the long term, might be the safer hire. Now, I still like the hire. I still like the move. I think you had to make it. And Jim Leonhard may still remain on staff in some capacity. We don't know. I find it unlikely, but yeah, there is very real risk here that I wanted to talk about. Let me know in the comments if you agree, disagree, if you think that this is almost a zero risk thing. I've seen a lot of people kind of say that this is almost a move without risk because of Fickell's track record and his history, and that we'll just get Jim Leonhard back if we need him. I don't know about that. Anyway, thank you for tuning in to Locked On Badgers. Really appreciate y'all. I got a show with John Garcia coming up as well. A lot of content coming out. We're going to keep tracking all the coaching moves, recruiting moves, basketball coming up this weekend. So we're going to have you covered on all that. Really appreciate you tuning in to the show. On Wisconsin, and let's keep going.